Alright, today I'm going to walk through the basic fuel setup going in as an upgrade on the Civic build. As I said before, I'm going to be converting the car to run E85, so we'll do a pump gas 93 and E85 map that should be able to toggle and correct in between. So with that comes a certain amount of upgrades that have to be done to the car, from the fuel lines to the inline filter to the pump to the injectors, and basically to the mapping, which is going to get a Honda S300 ECU as well. So what I'm going to do is show you what's going to happen on the intake manifold, what I'm going to upgrade, basically how I'm going to do it, how I'm going to convert the fuel line in the car, and yeah, go. Okay, a basic rundown of what I have is going to be it's a fairly simple setup for the car, simple but effective. Going with the AEM fuel rail, the AEM fuel pressure regulator that's going to bolt to the rail instead of being off rail. We do a lot of air motive setups that are off rail, but to keep it simple, I'm doing the AEM on rail, the AEM regulator, Turbo Smart fuel pressure gauge, a set of 1000cc grams injectors. For the tank, I'm going to do a grams 320 fuel pump that'll work with the E85 and the pump gas, and the inline grams 6AN fuel filter. I'm going to set those off to the side because I'm not even going to use them right now. So yeah, all of this is what's going to be used on the actual intake manifold. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is unbolt the rail and the injectors. I'm going to reuse the injector O-rings because you'll need them with the new set of injectors. Fuel pressure regulator, discard it because we're not going to need it anymore. And yeah, we'll go from that. As you can see, there's not a whole lot to it as far as pulling the rail off. It's just a 10mm to get the 3 stud nuts off, and a 10 to get the fuel pressure gauge off. So if you remove those 5 bolts, this comes out. You make sure you keep your O-rings in the hole because you will use them again on the new injectors. But I'll go ahead and get the other stuff opened up. You can see a side by side of what you're looking at. Okay, I pulled those apart. So first up, I got the AEM fuel rail. Got the 2 end fittings and a set of O-rings to come with it. I'm not going to use the end fittings on the feed side because I'm going to convert to 6AN, but I will use the plug on the opposite end. And let me see the injectors. They come with the top hats, and these have a set of O-rings on them actually. So I'll pull the factory ones out. And they also come with the pigtails to make the wiring fairly simple. And these are, again, 1000cc injectors. Let's see, fuel pressure regulator. Which is great. It comes with the new bolts, so I won't have to use the old crusty ones. So I'll use the new bolts to bolt those down. It's a pretty big thing on these regulators and these aftermarket rails. For the Hondas, you can either have an inline bolt pattern or you can have an offset bolt pattern where the center port will be slightly higher than the 2 bolts to bolt it down. You want to make sure that you're matching up your rail to be center port if you're using a center port regulator. If not, they'll go together, but the port will be offset and it won't work. So you make sure you have the matching setup for it all to work well together. Another good thing about these rails is it has this secondary port here. This is where I'm going to put the fuel pressure gauge. So I'll go ahead and get all this stuff out, get ready to put it together for you. I guess I'll point a few small things out. These newer EV14 style injector bodies are a lot smaller, a lot more efficient. So you always have to make sure you have the right top hat to go with it. The top hat gives it the correct height to bolt back into the stock configuration. So you should be able to take your rail, slide it on with the stock washers, and have your injector fit the exact same way it did as factory. Okay, I've got the rail and injectors bolted back down. You know, in an effort not to bore you, I didn't even record it because it goes back together the exact same way it came apart. I put just a dab of oil on each O-ring so that it all slides together fairly easily. Bolted back down. I'm going to show you on the regulators. It's very important to be sure that when you swap these over, you pull the O-ring out of the old one, unless there's a new O-ring in here. Never mind, there's a new O-ring in here. Be sure to put this O-ring into the regulator, because if you don't, you're going to get a fuel leak right here around the base. Okay, I've got the regulator mounted, all bolted down to the rail. What comes next is the fuel pressure gauge. This mounts to, like I said, the secondary port that's right here. You can mount it straight in like this, but what I'm going to do is use a 90-degree fitting and point it forward, so you're not going to have to be at some crazy angle, you know, under the hood to look at it, because you want to be able to have a gauge to make sure that A, you can set the base pressure and see where your pressure's at, just for the car to idle and do the base tuning, but also when you're tuning the car and you need to see the pressure to make sure that it's going up, because this should work as the fuel pressure rises when it gets in the boost and not drop. So you could easily see what your pressure is doing while the car is running if it's pointing forward. It's just easier. So I'm going to go convert a fitting to turn this to 90 degree and screw it back into this hole and be finished with the fuel rail setup. Being that this is a 1/8 NPT port, I use the same Teflon paste I used on the oil lines to put this assembly right here together to make sure that you don't end up getting any leaks. Now I've got the gauge installed. Just a tip, I do a lot of fuel setups on the gauges. It's a very simple, inexpensive part. Make sure when you get the gauge, or if you get a gauge from us, it's going to be a liquid filled gauge. I typically use Turbo Smart or Aeromotive. I just happen to have a Turbo Smart here right now. That's why I'm putting one on the car. There's a lot of gauges that don't come liquid filled that are prone to failing within, in my experience, a matter of minutes. They just rattle and vibrate to death and then they don't work. So spend the extra $5 or $10 or whatever it takes and get a good solid fuel pressure gauge that's going to work. Don't get the cheaper, you know, ones. Some of them have a good brand behind them that aren't liquid filled, because they're not going to last very long. I've never had one work as it should. So for the past, I don't know, almost 10 years, I've been using these same 2 gauges and I've never had an issue with them. Okay, over to the car itself. It's a pretty simple conversion to make the factory heart line go to a -6 line. That way I can build the -6 fuel feed to go from that heart line to the rail and still get the grams inline filter in place so I can mount it on the firewall or wherever I'm going to mount it at. Basically, this line is 5/16, and I use a flareless 5/16 to -6 fitting, which means I can cut the line. I deburred it and made sure it was a straight cut. Slip over this female fitting that has a ferrule inside, and then when you tighten these 2 pieces together, it tightens down and becomes a -6 fitting that doesn't leak. So it's pretty simple there. And on the return side, I'll use the same OEM return port off that regulator. So it's a pretty simple thing to do. That way it allows me room to build the line how I want it, mount the filter where I want it, and have it out the way. Now this is a shot of the fuel filter that will be used here. It's the Grams 20 micron 6AN inlet outlet filter that's compatible with different types of fuels, including the E85 and the 93 we'll be using. I'm not going to mount it now because I don't want it to dictate anything as far as how I'm going to build the turbo setup and then run the lines. So I'll mount this on a different vlog to show you where I put it, how I built the lines, and of course direction of flow, which just tells you exactly, you know, in one end, out the other. So you don't want to put them in backwards. But yeah, that's about it. I'll show you a shot of the regulator setup mounted on the car, and that'll be it for this one. Well, that's it. It's all mounted in place, easily accessible. You can also see the 2 power steering lines. I'll get to that on another episode as well. But yeah, if you have any questions, post in the comments, subscribe, share, like, and let me know what you think, and I'll get to it next time and show you some turbo stuff.